You sent us quite a few interesting sources this week, but there was one, this advocacy piece focused on just one judicial race. It really stood out. Yeah, it felt like it needed its own closer look. It's very local, Pennsylvania specific, but the way it's written, wow, the stakes feel huge, almost national. So we're going to cut right to the chase on this one. This deep dive is all about a really focused call to action. It's about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court retention election, and the core facts are simple enough. The election, Tuesday, November 4th, and it's specifically about keeping or retaining 3 judges currently on the court.
Exactly. And what makes this source, really worth analyzing isn't just those facts. It's the intensity, the force of the argument. I mean, this isn't just a flyer saying, here's who's on the ballot. It's making an urgent political demand. So our mission here, for you listening, is to go beyond just saying what the piece says. We need to analyze the strategy behind it. Like, why frame this local vote as some kind of fight for constitutional survival? That's where the real insight is, I think.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, starting with the basics, what exactly is it asking people to do?
Well, looking at the source, it's super targeted. Right off the bat, it's talking to people connected to Pennsylvania, calls it the Keystone State. So yeah, definitely aimed at folks there. And the instruction, it couldn't be clearer. It literally says, vote yes to retain 3 justices. No gray area there. It's not consider these justices. It's a flat-out yes, a really unified push for keeping them.
And that unified yes, that right there is kind of the first signal that something is maybe a bit different with this election. We're talking about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, right? The highest court in the state. And for you listening, maybe you're prepping for a meeting or just trying to stay informed, it's really important to get what a retention election even is, because it's not like your typical race.
Yeah, please walk us through that, because honestly, you don't usually see this level of passionate advocacy for a retention vote. It feels unusual. They absolutely are usually low key. So in a normal, say, partisan election, judges run against other people, their platforms, sort of. A retention election, totally different. The judge is basically running against their own record. Should we keep this person, yes or no? And historically, these retention elections, super low interest, turnout is often low, and the judges, they almost always win. Success rates are often way up there, above 90%. They're supposed to be more of a non-political check. Is the judge competent? Fair, that kind of thing. So when you see an advocacy group spending serious time, probably money, and definitely this kind of rhetorical energy demanding a specific vote yes, well, it signals this race has shifted. It's moved way beyond that standard procedural checkup. It suggests either the justices themselves are maybe controversial or, and this is probably more likely, the court is expected to rule on some really big, really politically sensitive issues soon. The source is basically treating this retention vote like it's a high-stakes partisan showdown.
That's fascinating. So the fact that this advocacy even exists in this intense way tells us more about the perceived stakes than maybe the judge's actual track records might. Okay, so let's get into the why then, because this is where the language really leaps from just local politics to something bigger feeling. The main reason the source gives for voting YES is, and I'm quoting here, to retain justices who will protect your fundamental rights and freedoms. Okay, I have to ask. Calling a state retention vote a battle for fundamental rights, isn't that a bit, hyperbolic, political spin? Why not talk about specific rulings or their judicial philosophy in concrete terms?
What's fascinating here is that is the strategy. You've hit on something really crucial. Judges, ethically, can't really campaign on promises about future rulings. They can't say, vote for me, I promise to rule this way on that issue. That's just not allowed. So what they, or groups supporting them, have to do is rely on broader, more universal, values-based language. By tying the vote directly to fundamental rights and freedoms, the source neatly sidesteps talking about specific, maybe divisive policy outcomes which judges can't promise anyway. Instead, it forces the voter into thinking in terms of 2 camps. The protectors of rights and, the implied alternative of those who might threaten them. It immediately lifts the whole thing above just Harrisburg politics and plugs into these bigger, often national anxieties people have.
Right, so it's a kind of strategic simplification. They're not asking you to weigh a complex legal record. They're asking, which ideology do you trust more to be the ultimate guardian of your basic security and freedoms?
Precisely. And the source doubles down on that feeling of high consequence by injecting urgency. There's that line, it's never been more important to support men and women. That phrasing frames right now this election not just as another vote, but as a genuine crisis point. It ramps up the psychological pressure on the voter to actually show up and, crucially, to vote yes, like the source wants. I mean, this is classic stuff for trying to overcome voter apathy, which, let's face it, is usually sky high for judicial elections.
So the rhetoric is definitely designed to make people care, maybe even worry about something they might normally just skip on the ballot. But it's not just about general freedom. The source also brings in more formal ideas, right? It shifts to principles of how judges should act. It says these justices need support because they're people who respect the Constitution and the rule of law. Okay, looking at the argument they're building, why is linking this retention vote specifically to the rule of law so important when we're talking about the state's highest court?
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, remember, the state Supreme Court isn't just handling minor disputes. They are the final word on the Pennsylvania state constitution. That means they interpret the foundational legal text for the whole state. And that impacts everything, often in ways the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't touch, or where, the state constitution might offer even more protection than the federal one. So this specific focus on the rule of law, well, it suggests the people behind this source are worried about how laws are being interpreted and applied in Pennsylvania right now. Think about the kinds of huge cases the PA Supreme Court has dealt with recently. Things like redrawing election maps, rules for voting, environmental laws, state-level rights concerning privacy or fairness. These are all areas where the idea of rule of law, meaning applying established legal principles impartially, is constantly being tested and debated.
Ah, I see. So by demanding judges who respect the Constitution, the source is basically telling the voter, the outcome here decides the whole philosophical direction of the court on these massive life-altering issues. It's about defending a particular view of what following the Constitution means.
Exactly right. They're essentially drawing a line. On one side, they imply our judges dedicated to stability and established law. On the other, well, the implication is maybe judges who are more activist or who might disregard precedent, at least in the source author's view. Using these big formal concepts like constitution and rule of law helps justify their claim that who sits on this court is fundamental to maintaining, well, constitutional order as they see it.
So what does this all mean? Let's try to boil it down. What's the core message and the takeaway for someone trying to understand this source? Okay, here's the synthesis. On Tuesday, November 4th, in Pennsylvania, there's this retention election for 3 Supreme Court justices. And the specific advocacy piece we've analyzed is pushing hard for a YES vote. It strategically frames what's normally a low-key procedural vote as absolutely critical. Critical for what? For protecting personal freedoms, upholding the Constitution, and ensuring the rule of law. The real insight here isn't just the recommendation, it's the intensity of that rhetoric. It shows just how politicized and high stakes the state's top court has apparently become, at least in the eyes of this source's author.
And again, we have to stress our role here. It's purely analytical. We've taken this very potent, politically charged source and hopefully unpacked its arguments. We looked at its strategic use of these big universal ideas like fundamental rights and how it deliberately elevates a usually sleepy election into this major constitutional drama. We're just distilling the viewpoint that's presented in the source, definitely not endorsing the political stance itself. The takeaway for you, the listener, is really about seeing the strategic layers that can exist even in very specific, very local political messaging.
Right. So for you taking this in, remember the key points from the source. The date, November 4th.
Right.
The place, Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, and the powerful reason they give. That this isn't just reviewing judges, it's a necessary act to secure freedoms and constitutional integrity.
This raises an important question. Given how specific and incredibly forceful this language is, framing a retention vote as this vital defense of fundamental rights and freedoms, what does that tell us? What does it imply about the sheer scale of the issues that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is already dealing with, or maybe is about to deal with? Does the fact that they feel the need to use such dramatic language suggest that really major constitutional fights, maybe ones we used to think of as settled or only national level, are now playing out directly within the framework of state judicial retention elections?
A local judicial race being treated like a national struggle for the state's future really makes you think. Thank you for helping us dive so deep into what this one source is really saying. Go forth and explore this topic further, especially if you happen to be navigating the complexities of that Keystone State ballot.